Canadians are exceptionally proud of our athletes, especially when we see them competing and succeeding abroad. We are well aware, of course, that these athletes often, but not always, earn significant salaries. What the average person does not normally think about is the implications, particularly tax implications, that comes with playing professional sports and earning a large income in a different country. This, of course, lies true regardless if you're a Canadian pro hockey player in Los Angeles or an American professional linebacker playing for the BC Lions. We should not be surprised to learn that there are professionals to assist in navigating the complex world of cross-border taxation for professional athletes. Trowbridge Corporation has joined us on a number of episodes in the past to talk about international taxes, and as it turns out, they have a professional who is dedicated to helping professional athletes and artists deal with cross-border taxes. Brandon Vucen is that professional, and he joins me today. Brandon, welcome to the Canadian Expat.
Hi, Alan. Thanks.
Brandon, I'm curious about what you do. Can you share a little bit about, first of all, yourself and the sort of clients that you work with?
Sure. I'm a tax director at Trowbridge in the Private Client Services Group. My specialty area includes servicing professional athletes in the NHL, the NBA, some CFL players as well, and executive staff in the NBA as well.
So when it comes to professional athletes, what kind of needs do they have? Then what sort of services do you offer those people?
Yeah, we offer a full range of services, including tax compliance and tax planning services. Ultimately, the goal is to lessen their tax burden as much as possible, however, without exposing them to any undue tax risks. As you may have seen in the media recently, there's a story about Darcy Tucker and Shane Corson, former Toronto Maple Leafs, that are being audited by the CRA, and their tax exposure in that area is, in the millions of dollars. And it's likely that, these are the CRA, indicated that they were basically sham transactions because they're claiming foreign currency losses against their employment income. And it's likely that there probably was a tax advisor that, that led them down that path to take such a position. In terms of tax compliance services, that really, it's a preparation of tax returns, replying to any tax notices. From a tax planning perspective, we look at estate and gift tax planning opportunities and advising athletes if they should obtain a green card while they're playing in the United States.
So in terms of tax compliance, how do professional athletes' tax compliance needs differ from the average taxpayer? I mean, besides the obvious sum of money that we're dealing with?
Well, as you say, their income is definitely higher. However, since they play in the NHL and the NBA, they play on both sides of the border, so you need to be aware of the cross-border aspects. And additionally, there's an income tax treaty between Canada and the United States that one always has to consider in this type of scenario. Also need to be aware that, each of the leagues has a collective bargaining agreement, so you need to be aware of the terms in that agreement. And it is important because, for example, the CBA in the NBA doesn't allow its players to actually enter into a retirement compensation arrangement for those players that are playing up in with the Toronto Raptors. So I find it amusing because they said it basically gave the Raptors an unfair advantage in terms of recruiting players up to Canada, whereas I kind of look at it that it kind of reduced the disadvantage that they previously had. The players also play in multiple states, so you need to be aware of those different jurisdictions, and also some of those states. Some of them rely on the tax treaty, and some of them don't rely on the tax treaty. So you need to kind of again be aware of what states do otherwise accept the tax treaty again between the U.S. and Canada.
That's really super interesting. So, what would you consider to be the biggest challenges facing professional athletes today in terms of these taxation or tax compliance?
Yeah, I mean, most importantly, they have to rely on our team to provide them with accurate information and hopefully do the proper income tax withholding. For example, New York State requires the W-2 reporting done by the athletes to report 100% of their wages as being New York State wages, and then ultimately the player or their tax advisor need to correctly figure out the amount of income actually allocated to New York State, which adds to a little bit of complexity and sometimes can lead to errors as well. Some states are aggressive in their auditing with professional athletes. New York State is one, for example. California as well. I've seen some of our clients have received notices recently from California. And California is interesting because their statute of limitations period is 4 years, whereas most the IRS and most other states are 3 years. So again, we've been seeing some of our clients getting notices dating back to 2016. So basically, you need to reply and to see if their calculation of income is correct. And again, it's bit of complexity and can be a little burdensome at the same time. CRA, they can always change your interpretation. For example, with respect to signing bonuses, and most critically for Canadian players or Canadian resident players that play down in the U.S., we need to provide CRA with support for foreign tax credit claim that we make in Canada for taxes paid to the various states. And the support that CRA looks for is, it's kind of onerous. They're looking for information that the states don't really provide, because the individual states don't provide account transcripts. So ultimately, you need to go back to, looking at checks are being cashed or refunds are deposited. So they really are asking for, a lot of information, which is cumbersome. And again, at some point, maybe the cost outweighs the benefit. So, there's a loss in tax dollars to those athletes.
Sounds super complex. I'm going to shift gears just a
to make it
little
easy.
bit. Yeah. Well, what do you think of the bubble formats of the NBA and the NHL? I'm asking this because you've got kind of a unique view on the whole situation.
Yeah, as a fan, I thought it was great. I got to see a lot of exciting games and a lot of games. In hockey and basketball. However, you're right. Most people wouldn't necessarily think about the tax implications. For example, because the hockey bubble was in Canada and the NBA bubble was in Florida, the teams would have to adjust their state withholding tax rates because all of a sudden those players weren't playing in various states. They were either playing in Florida that doesn't impose a personal income tax, or they were playing up in Canada where it's a different jurisdiction altogether. So it's most likely that some teams maybe made those adjustments, but I would imagine that a lot of them didn't. So then it otherwise falls upon the player or their tax advisor to kind of do things correctly. And then unfortunately, once income is reported on W-2, to make adjustments from that is a little bit trickier, and sometimes you may not be able to electronically file a tax return in that situation. So again, it can lead to some complexities. I think the biggest impact, kind of the tax impact to players, would actually be to the Toronto Blue Jay players, because if you recall, they weren't actually allowed to play in Canada, so they had to play in the United States. So that would significantly reduce the amount of their income that was otherwise subject to Canadian tax. So those players actually got a benefit out of it because ultimately their tax rate in the States or their home country, if they're not a U.S. person, would have been less than playing in Canada. So it's significant savings for some of those guys. For the NBA players, again, because they were in Orlando, they weren't playing otherwise in Canada. Again, tax savings for those players because they weren't, not as much of their income was subject to tax in Canada. So, for example, a American player that otherwise resides in a no-tax state such as Florida, Nevada, or Texas, if their salary is maybe $10 million, they could see a tax reduction of $350,000 in 2020, which again is significant.
Significant. Interesting. Brandon, thanks so much for joining me. This has been really fascinating.
That's great. Thanks, Alan.
And thanks again for watching. If you've enjoyed this, make sure you hit that like button and please subscribe. We'd love to produce more of this for you. Until next time.